Hi everyone, I'm Vanessa, marketing lead at Adina, and you're listening to The Beauty Curtain. This is the podcast that draws back the curtain on the beauty and personal care industry. And today we're back with our very special guest, Harry McIlwraith. He is the general manager of the Upcycled beauty company. Harry and the team are at the forefront of the circularity movement, turning waste into wonders, creating upcycled ingredients, transforming the beauty and personal care industry. Welcome to the show, Harry.
Thank you very much, Vanessa.
It's great to have you on, Harry. So, a lot of questions, but let's firstly get into your personal story. So, what inspired you, firstly, to pursue a career in beauty and personal care?
Well, I didn't really. I didn't really have any ambition necessarily to be in the beauty and personal care industry. I kind of fell into it, which is what many people have found themselves as well. So I went to Bath University. I did chemistry. I studied chemistry. Graduated in 2009, and at that time it was the financial crisis. So there's very few companies actually recruiting. And one of the companies that I applied to that was very close to where I was living was Atchison. So I applied there, went through the recruitment process, and luckily they were looking for a new laboratory technician. And I started in January of 2010. I was there then for many, many years, working with many different very competent technical managers, senior chemists, etc., working my way up. I did the diploma in cosmetic science and eventually became a junior chemist, then worked my way up to a chemist, senior chemist, and eventually was a technical manager before I left. The company went through many changes over the years, expanded massively. They built their own factory, and that completely changed the business. So we went from just formulating for companies and having all of our products manufactured by a third party to then doing the manufacture ourselves in-house. So I worked on many different brands, from Marks and Spencer's to Elemis to Bulldog, and then towards the end, once Atchison had been bought out by the Hut Group, I worked on THG, the Hut Group brands, Glossybox, Mama Mio, and others. And eventually, once I'd been there for 10 years, I decided it was about time that I should move on, I guess, having been the only real job that I'd had. And the Upcycled Beauty Company, or Upcycled Beauty as it was back then, was one of those opportunities, and very happy to move on. And I've now been with the Upcycled Beauty Company for over 4 years now, and we're doing very well.
Wow. So, just to go back a little bit, when you're working at Atchison, is it called A&A?
It's now called THG Labs Atchison.
Okay. So back then, when you were a lab technician and then you're working in technical.
Yes.
So what does that mean? Were you actually formulating the products? Were you creating them?
So to start with, I was working at the bench. So when I was a technician and even a junior chemist, I was really just working with a technical manager or a chemist, senior chemist, doing the lab work for them. So they were coming up with the formulations. I was then making them at the bench. They were then checking them, looking at them, and then maybe making continuous improvements on them. And as that process went on, I learned how to use the different raw materials, learned the different technologies that were available, and then learned how to formulate myself. But a lot of the time we were, doing kind of continuous improvements on many different formulations and going through the full development process from prototyping, sort of starting scale up for user trials, and the clinical trials, all the stability testing, challenge testing, those sorts of things. And then because we did have our factory, we're also going for scale up at the factory scale, and then also full production. So as time went on, as kind of my job changed, I was going and seeing those production batches as well.
Wow. And also you've worked with some really big brands, right? Like the Hut Group is very big, very famous. I'm sure they're like household names, right? So are there any products that you're particularly proud of kind of creating or being a part of? Can you talk about that?
When I was at A&A, the brand that I worked with almost consistently through the time I was there was M&S, Marks and Spencer's. And one of the sort of early sub-ranges they had was their M&S Pure range. And within that, they had their Pure Grape range. And that's the first experience I had of upcycling. So that was working with one of their wine suppliers, Chapeldown, that's in Kent, Tenton in Kent, taking their grape pomace and then having that processed at a company just outside of York and extracting the resveratrol from that. So that's an antioxidant. And then we were turning that into a skincare range. The pure grape, which then became pure super grape, and then eventually was natural radiance. I think that's only just been discontinued 12 years. Yeah, 12 years after it was originally formulated. So that's one that sort of sticks to mind. Otherwise, the Bulldog skincare for men, so that was another range that had been formulated and was being manufactured by a third party. I think it was made at Laleham Healthcare. And that was then brought to us to be fully reformulated and to be redeveloped, I guess, and relaunched. So that was, a big piece of work. It was huge volumes, whereas when I was working on the M&S ranges, we're looking at maybe 5,000 to 10,000 units per SKU. The Bulldog range, we were looking at 500,000 to 1 million units. So it was just a completely different kettle of fish, really.
Wow, it's amazing to hear that 10 years ago, you'd already picked up on the idea of upcycling. Because I feel like the trend or the movement has really just come about more recently. So do you think that experience kind of helped you or influenced you in some way to join the Upcycled Beauty company?
Oh, I think absolutely. So that the pure grape range wasn't the only upcycled range that we did for M&S either. We also did one with sloes from their juices, and then also from their beer, which I guess we'll talk about later on if we talk about raw materials that we're doing currently. But yes, absolutely, it makes sense. Upcycling kind of makes sense from that point of view. We're just using something in a much better way. If you think about the origins of the upcycling, of the cosmetics industry, you think of lanolin, tallow, beeswax, squalene. All of those ingredients are upcycled. They're from admittedly mostly animal sources, but it just makes sense to use them. Otherwise, they would just go to waste.
Wow. So do you have a particular passion for sustainability and upcycling, or did you kind of just fall into this because it as you said, like it works well, it's a given to use these kind of waste materials?
I enjoy it. I grew up in the middle of nowhere in Kent. I grew up with many farmers, and I think sustainability in reducing the sort of use of virgin ingredients, it makes sense. But personally, I find the optimization of uses of things quite intriguing. I guess I'm an engineer at heart. Doing things in the lowest energy use possible is something that appeals to me. Going back to Bulldog, when we were reformulating their ranges, one of the things that we did was we changed the manufacturing method to reduce the amount of energy that was used in the manufacture. So by changing the order of addition of ingredients, by making them in one pot methods, it was all work that did with the factory, ended up being able to reduce the energy usage by 60% in the majority of their products, which when you're making tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands even of units, adds up very quickly. It was nice to see the numbers.
Wow, that's amazing. That I say so long ago. I mean, what, 10 years? 10 years ago?
Looking at sort of seven years ago for that bit of work, but throughout, I guess, forever I've been intrigued by it.
I mean, as I was saying, that's amazing that 7 years ago you guys were already putting in these concepts and cutting carbon and things like that. Maybe let's dive into circularity and what that actually means, maybe before we go on to the Upcycled Beauty company. Because I think a lot of companies obviously still use like a traditional linear model. So what's the difference?
So a linear model is where it's take, make, dispose. So the product's made, it's packaged, it comes to your home, you use it, and then you dispose of that carton. So the entire process can be over quite a long period of time, but at the end of it, you've got something that's going in the recycling, in the bin that's then going to landfill. The difference really is that we are then, in the more circular method, we are taking feedstocks that would otherwise have already gone in the bin or gone to animal feed, gone to anaerobic digestion, and turning that into a raw material. That then is going to somebody's home. They're then using the product. It may be at the end of that process when the jar is empty, let's say, that jar then it can be brought back to the manufacturer, and it could be turned into something else, or it could be refilled, and you have that kind of continuous process, the much more circular route for that packaging for that product.
I guess, is this difficult to do? So are there many kind of barriers to entry for, companies in this industry to be focusing on using a circular model? What are the challenges with this?
So for the raw material side of things, yes, there are. So one of the biggest issues that we have is when we're looking for a feedstock that we're going to be turning into a raw material. Not only is sort of what we can do with it, but we need to make sure that feedstock is going to be of a consistent quality, because of course we want our product to be consistent, high quality. We want to make sure that there's going to be enough of it. We don't want to be both running out, but also we don't want to have things that were only available during a single harvest of a year. So we've done projects with, say, grape, as I mentioned for M&S. Grape is, of course, harvested once a year, relatively short harvest period. And it means that if you're going to have a grape-related product that's going to be available throughout the year, you need to make a lot of it in a short space of time. All of the wine that's on the shelves is generally produced in a single harvest, apart from, of course, northern and southern hemisphere wines make that difference. But yes, it's less easy than a single, what's the word for it?
Linear?
Taking virgin ingredients, it can be a lot less easy from that perspective.
Is it a lot more costly?
Can be more costly, yes. For, again, some particular examples. So when we take our feedstock from the barley, the difficulty would be if we're taking virgin barley, for instance. It's generally already dry. We can work with it immediately. And yes, there may be more processing to do to produce our ingredients. But when we take our feedstock for the barley tonic, it's a wet ingredient. We need to harvest it and process it immediately, generally within the same day that the sort of feedstock process has happened. And so, yeah, there can be additional costs in that process.
So you've mentioned a few barriers to entry. There's a lot more processing that can be more costly. But would you say upcycling is crucial for the beauty and personal care industry? And if so, why is it so important?
Well, I guess fundamentally, the beauty and personal care industry, a lot of the products that we produce are luxury items. And so reducing the sort of carbon footprint, reducing the environmental impact of those is, of course, very important. If we look at not necessarily upcycled ingredients, but more environmentally friendly ingredients, reducing waste, reducing pollution, they're all essential that we should do. Fundamentally, I think every industry needs to be doing it, but this is just the one that we are in, and the more we can do, the better.
Now, let's dive more into the Upcycled Beauty Company and how you guys are, I guess, helping with this future of upcycling and creating a more sustainable industry. So, I guess, what is the mission of the Upcycled Beauty Company?
Well, we have a vision that one day every beauty and personal care product will be upcycled. So you'll be able to go into a supermarket, drugstore, pharmacy, wherever you buy your personal care products, and everything will be upcycled and hopefully even packaged in upcycled ingredients. Obviously, we're not there yet, but we would, of course, like to be.
So you say you're not there yet. I'd love to know kind of where you guys are.
Okay. So obviously we have our raw materials. A lot of what fundamentally we're a raw material manufacturer, but a lot of what we do is sort of educational side of things and try to build the momentum for the movement. So we see this as a movement rather than just a trend, upcycling that is. So speaking at industry events, doing podcasts like this one, speaking at webinars, those sorts of things. We're doing everything that we can, and also we're collaborating with other manufacturers, raw material manufacturers, potentially promoting their ingredients, so on our social media platforms and those sorts of things, doing what we perceive to be everything we can to sort of boost the momentum for it.
Interesting. So why do you place such an importance on the education side?
Well, because it's kind of a paradigm shift from the sort of more linear model, making sure that both the customers and also the manufacturers are more aware of what's available. We're only a small manufacturer. There are lots of other upcycled ingredients that are being produced by other companies, as we like to think of them as collaborators rather than competitors. But doing what we can to make those materials more accessible and more visible to manufacturers, the better.
So what has the response been? You said you've done, more podcasts than this one. Very happy to have you on ours. You've spoken at industry events and you host webinars. So yeah, what is the response from customers, from the industry?
Oh, it's generally very good, especially from customers. What we do see, though, is that although the customers seem to be really wanting upcycle products as much as they can, many of the brands that are using our ingredients or our competitors' ingredients, collaborators' ingredients, are not necessarily actually talking about there being upcycled ingredients on pack. Initially, we thought that maybe that people would potentially be a bit squeamish about having upcycled ingredients. I mean, they're, I guess, waste, and they may be a little bit scared about doing that. But we see there's been a bit of a move beyond that as well, as people are more and more accepting of it.
I guess that must be kind of a common maybe misconception that the industry has about upcycled ingredients, the fact that it's coming from waste, and what does that mean? I think maybe even customers could think, oh gosh, I'm putting waste on my face, but actually, of course, that is completely that's untrue. Can you tell me more about maybe the process of creating the ingredients and how maybe it's not real, waste or trash that you're not putting in ingredients?
Yeah, of course, we're not necessarily going to a recycling centre and collecting rubbish from them, or landfill and collecting rubbish from that. But many of the raw materials that we would be taking or have taken would otherwise be destined for those. So we have to be very careful when we're selecting our feedstocks. We're taking things that are in large quantities. We're generally working with food processors, so working with things that are in large quantities, that are producing them not only daily, but also like large amounts that we can take at a certain time. And it means that they're not necessarily going off, they're not spoiling. There's minimizing any micro issues with them, which can be one of the largest headaches for people in our kind of space. And the big thing that we always want to make sure is that our products perform better than a comparable material from a virgin source. So things like our blueberry nectar, for instance, we were able to show higher antioxidant potential than a conventionally sourced blueberry seed oil. Same for our raspberry nectar or even hemp nectar. So it's taking something and making it into something that's better than a conventionally sourced material.
That's so interesting. Can you tell us more about why the product performs better than one from like a virgin source? So, I mean, is it to do with the fact that it's more ripe, or, why?
So for blueberry and raspberry nectar in particular, so when they're taken from the juicing process, so we're taking pomace straight from juicers, seeds are separated out, it's dried, and then they're processed within a very short space of time. So when the seed is within the fruit, it's protected by all of the antioxidants and all of the other ingredients that are within the fruit itself. But when the seed's out by itself, having oxygen next to it or air next to it, that's when it starts to oxidize and degrade. So we're making sure that there's a very small amount of time between when the fruit is intact to when the seed is then pressed. And at least we believe that's why our ingredients are performing better. I don't want to say better because it's, well, in my perspective, but they perform better in the tests that we've done.
Wow, that's really interesting. So you've mentioned blueberry and raspberry nectar. So I'm guessing those are two, well, of course, those are two ingredients in your portfolio. Can you tell us a bit more about your portfolio and maybe what feedstocks you use and what ingredients you've created from that?
Of course. So there's three parts to the portfolio. So we have our nectars, as I've mentioned already. So these are our oil-soluble actives. So we have raspberry and blueberry nectar, which I mentioned from the juicing industry. So blueberry nectar is standardized for its level of carotenoids. It's very good for blue light protection. So we have a lovely image of shining a blue light laser through a measuring cylinder of blueberry nectar versus olive oil, and you can see the transmission through the olive oil, but the absorbance with blueberry nectar. And like I said, it's an antioxidant. So we have in vivo hydration data for it as well. So it's a moisturizing active. Raspberry nectar. So it's standardized for its level of tocopherol, natural vitamin E, mostly delta tocopherol as well. So it doesn't seem to pro-oxidize as well as another vitamin E derived ingredient. And it also has in vivo hydration data for it as well. Then we have our tonics, which are water-soluble actives. So we have barley tonic, which is produced from the leftovers of beer production. So we work with a brewery that's about 40 kilometers away from us. They work with farms that are within sort of a 10 to 15 kilometer radius of them. And they take the barley, they malt it, they mash it, which is where they put it into a mixing vessel, mash tun, and extract all the sugars. And that sugary water, the wort, then goes on to be fermented and turned into beer. But what's left over from that process is the barley and sometimes other cereal grains. And we take that, we put it into our vessel. We process it with an enzymatic method, enzymatic extraction, which breaks down the proteins into amino acids, peptides, and polypeptides. And then that is our barley tonic. So it's very good for skin soothing, anti-irritation, anti-redness. Last tonic is our Fabertonic. So Fabertonic is a hairstyling ingredient. It's our only hairstyling ingredient so far.
Just to mention, I'm using a product with Fabertonic in my hair today.
Very good.
Just to rep the Upcycled Beauty company.
So Fabertonic is produced from the leftovers of hummus production. So when hummus is made, they take chickpeas, and the company we work with, who's our supplier, they produce hummus for many of the big supermarkets in the UK. And they take the chickpeas, they boil them until they soften, and then they drain the liquid and they process those chickpeas. But the leftover liquid from that process, the aquafaba, as it's often called, we then take that, we process that, and we turn that into Fabertonic. And it's very good for hair styling, hair conditioning, and we have data in both rinse off and leave on formats as well. That takes us on to our crushes. These are our exfoliant particles and active powders. We have charcoal, which is produced from a charcoal smoker in the UK. So when they are making oak fencing, the charcoal smoker takes any of the offcuts from that process from UK managed woodland and turns the offcuts into cooking charcoal. So they put into a charcoal kiln on the floor, they start a fire, and then they stop any oxygen going to the fire. So it basically cooks this wood into charcoal. And anything that's too small to be sold for cooking charcoal, we then process that into the different exfoliant grades we have, an active powder.
I think it's great that people kind of understand your portfolio a bit more, because knowing where you've kind of got the feedstock from is very interesting. I mean, it's from industries ranging from, the wood industry to hummus production to juicing. And I think I don't think a lot of people would know about that.
There's a lot of waste within the food industry, especially, and they're a great supplier to us. Many of the sort of food processors have vast amounts of waste. It's obviously a far bigger industry than the cosmetics industry. And because they're producing, or many of them are producing daily or at least weekly, they're a very good supplier. Very consistent. Obviously, they want their product to be consistent, and so often their waste is something that we can take, and as long as we process it relatively quickly, it's generally free from any micro issues, and it's very, very good for the body and good for the skin.
And do you only collaborate with suppliers and companies in the UK?
So generally, we would like to. It's not always so easy. So although there's lots of food processors in the UK, there's even more in Europe. So for instance, our blueberry and raspberry, we're currently working with partners in Europe, but we're trying to bring that more to the UK. Not always easy for what we can get.
I can imagine. But I guess what I'm trying to lead into is, do you guys consider your entire manufacturing process? So, of course, your ingredients are inherently sustainable as they're upcycled. But do you look into, for example, transport and packaging and things like that within your manufacturing process?
Oh, absolutely. So when we're looking at suppliers for our new products, especially, we're generally looking in the local area. So we're based in Kent, and it's often referred to as the Garden of England. So there's lots of fruit growers, especially, but also lots of food processors with that. So we've been speaking to the sort of big suppliers for the supermarkets in the UK, who are processing all the soft fruits. And we've had lots of contact with them. Admittedly, haven't actually had any projects that have taken off from them yet, but they have vast amounts of waste. One of them that we're speaking to earlier in the year, during the summer months, strawberries in particular, they can have 40 tons that they are disposing of per week. So it's a vast amount. It's far more than we'll be able to process. But it's, I guess, useful to know for us that it is available if we are able to get a project that's working. Often there's so much waste, but it's difficult to work out what we're going to do with it. And when it comes to things like the whole fruit, it's actually quite difficult because the fleshy part of those fruit, if we just take strawberries, for instance, the fleshy part, there's a lot of liquid that, yes, you could turn it into a juice, but it's not necessarily going to be concentrated to have enough of a benefit for the skin. So it's trying to work out what we can do with the more usable parts without actually contributing to the problem of waste. So if we're taking a ton of strawberries and processing that and turning it into, or concentrating it and turning it into 10 kilos of something that's useful, actually we have still produced a lot of waste in that process, so we need to consider that. But then when it comes to the transport of these things, we, like I said, we're doing it within the local area as much as we possibly can. And yeah, it's something that we consider. And even the manufacturing, we're trying to minimize the amount of energy that's used in the processing. So, for instance, barley tonic is only one of our products that's heated, and the only reason that that's heated is because we need to sterilize the feedstock. Although it's coming from a brewery that's quite close to us, unfortunately, in the 40 kilometers or few hours, it's not sterile when it arrives. So we need it to be perfectly sterile for when we put the enzymes in. Otherwise, the bacteria or yeast or mold, whatever is growing on the feedstock, unfortunately, will overwhelm what we put on and produce something that we're not wanting or not expecting.
I think that's really interesting that you guys are even conscious of what ingredients not to use. You know, you said there's a lot of waste, and, you know, you've even considered that actually, will we be adding to the problem? And I think that's really big in itself, and something I didn't know that you guys did. So I think now, and even you said 10 years ago, Marks and Spencer's, you know, they were using upcycled grape. And I think a lot more ingredient manufacturers are starting to, you know, pick up on this movement and create more upcycled ingredients. So, you know, is this a bad thing for the upcycled beauty company? Is this a challenge? Or, and also, what sets you guys apart from the rest?
There are only a few companies that specialize or only focus on upcycled ingredients. Yes, there are obviously the larger companies, the larger manufacturers, they may have one or two ingredients, or probably maybe even more than that now, that are upcycled. But because they've got such a large portfolio, those ingredients can easily be lost in that kind of database of things that they may have. And I think that's the biggest difference between us. But also, they're not going to be talking industry events. They're not going to be shouting about upcycled ingredients or the sustainability of them as much as we're able to do.
So the movement really is what sets you guys apart, that you're kind of pushing the message, and I guess you mentioned that you're also collaborating.
Yes, we are. So, though some of the other smaller companies, we are working with them. We might eventually start working with them and start selling their products for them, I guess. Um, we have distributors around much of the world, and for a company that may be producing an ingredient that's being used in food, they may not have the expertise to be selling into the cosmetics industry. And so we might be able to take on that responsibility for them.
I definitely want to dive a lot more into how you guys collaborate, but I think we might have to save that for another episode.
Okay.
I want to bring us back to the Upcycled Beauty Company and maybe more than what you guys do more than creating ingredients. So I've heard of your brand, Cherished, or demo brand.
Yes.
Can you tell me more about Cherished and maybe what the portfolio looks like and why you guys have created this?
So many raw material manufacturers will have their own sort of example formulations to illustrate what their ingredients can do and those sorts of things. We've taken that kind of a step further. So instead of just having a nameless range of ingredients, we've actually started up as a brand. So it's an internal brand at the moment. These products are not for sale, and the main purpose of them is to illustrate what can be done with upcycled ingredients. So the majority of them are 98% or above upcycled, and we're using ingredients from our own portfolio, but then also from other manufacturers as well. I mean, we don't have everything. We don't have upcycled emulsifiers, for instance, and so we are having to use our collaborators' ingredients as well.
So I've looked into Cherish a little bit and saw that you guys were in the finals of the Laura Marshall Award for Innovation at STS Formulate in 2022. Now, that is not an easy thing to do. There are several products submitted. So I'd love to know why you think your formulation was in the final. And also, can you tell us a bit more about that formulation as well?
Yes, of course. So that was our superfood cream. And at the time, the main innovation for it was its level of upcycled ingredients. So it was approximately 99.5% upcycled. And at that time, nobody else had done anything like that. At least had done that in a complex formulation. So there were other products that were fully upcycled, but generally those were oils. And so to have an emulsion that was nearly 100% upcycled was a very big innovation. I think we did say it was fully upcycled. The emulsifier was itself 50% upcycled. So
you said this potentially hasn't been done before. Having an emulsion that's 99.5% upcycled. Do you think it's practical to take that to market?
It would be wonderful to. However, we were using the ingredients at recommended levels across the board, and many of those are quite expensive actives. And it was more just to illustrate that it can be done. You could very easily simplify that formulation and probably make something that was commercially viable. But as that product stands, probably not. But like I said, simplifying it, yeah, you could make something that would be commercially viable. And I guess in the longer term for Cherished, that probably is where what we would like to do.
So looking at the longer term and maybe the future of the brand and the ingredients, what are your long-term goals? Where do you see the Upcycled Beauty Company in the future?
Well, there's a few kind of goals for us. So firstly, we want to, of course, launch more raw materials. So we would like to have those things like the emulsifiers that I said that we didn't have. We'd like to have fragrances, I guess, in the much longer term as well, and just every other kind of functionality that makes up all the different formulations, so surfactants as well. Of course, we're not there yet. We don't have the equipment to make them. We don't necessarily have the feedstocks to produce those as well. But it is, of course, something that we would like to do. Cherished, yes, of course, we would like to have that as our range as well. We're also working on a certification scheme for upcycled ingredients. So that's something, again, that we're working on in the background, hopefully going to be talking about that in Cosmetics in Amsterdam next year. So there's lots of things that we are working on in the background. to hopefully move push forward the movement, to continue it on, and yes, do everything that we can to grow as a business.
You mentioned a certification, and you did say that you would announce, more about this at INCOS next year. But is there anything that you can tell us now about that?
I mean, it's quite early stages at the moment, but we're working with quite a few third parties on that, and it is at early stages. So there is already one certification that's kind of related to the cosmetics industry, but it's I mean, mostly in food. It's from the Upcycled Food Association, and they are able to certify ingredients that are derived from food-based feedstocks. However, their definition is very much, it needs to be for food and from food. So ingredients like our charcoal crush, for instance, wouldn't be certifiable. And although all of the rest of our ingredients are certified, that's the one sort of glaring exception to that. And that's where that's why we started talking about having our own certification. But it's a long process. It's far more difficult than we thought it would be when we started.
I can imagine. And has something like the European Green Deal affected this process as well? Because obviously, just people who don't know, the European Green Deal has meant that beauty brands and companies in Europe have they now have to go through the EU, which means, it helps to tackle greenwashing, but it does mean that it's a longer process for companies with, upcycled claims and environmental claims to go through. So has this affected you guys?
Oh, absolutely. So our difficulty is there's no definition that's recognised by the EU for an upcycled ingredient or for upcycling as a whole. And so although it feels like it's an everyday term, especially to us, because we're saying it pretty much daily, it's not recognised by the EU yet. And although there's many different organisations working on a definition, ourselves included, because there isn't that kind of legal definition, it's quite difficult. And when it comes to the Green Deal for the finished goods, I guess for the raw materials, the Green Deal isn't necessarily affecting our raw materials or affecting raw materials. So if we had a certification, that could be valid for the raw materials. It's only for finished goods where they wouldn't necessarily be able to talk about certified upcycled ingredients without our certification process being recognised.
Okay, interesting. So would this certification sort of look like basically like an upcycled stamp?
Yes, potentially. The difficulty would be that if, with the Green Deal, brands wouldn't be able to have a upcycled stamp on pack as a whole.
Interesting. So this would be mainly on the ingredients side.
It would have to be on the ingredient side
Okay.
at the moment. Well, to start with, there might be one day in the future where an upcycle stamp would be a valid or validated stamp, but we haven't got to that process yet.
Okay. Well, I'm excited to see what you guys announce next year and the future of the upcycle beauty industry. I mean, it sounds amazing, and I wish you guys, the best of luck in furthering this movement. So my final question kind of comes back around to you, Harry, and I'd love to know what your favorite product or ingredient from the Upcycled Beauty Company is and why. What makes it special to you?
I think my favourite is probably barley tonic. So it's quite a simple ingredient from the perspective of speaking about it. So it's taking it from beer. Everybody knows what beer is to start with, whereas some of the other ingredients, it's a much more difficult thing to talk about. The efficacy is very good for it. Processing of it is, time consuming, but not overly complex. And it's a nice sort of green chemistry process as well. So although I mentioned that we do have to heat the product, it's the amount of energy that actually goes into produce it is really quite low anyway. We're going through the process of doing life cycle analysis for them at the moment, for all of our ingredients at the moment, but that's not quite completed yet. So it's a very nice, simple ingredient, and being a beer drinker myself, it appeals to me.
Amazing. I think we can stop there. Thanks so much, Harry, for joining us. We have a lot more to talk about, honestly, I mean collaboration and more about the movement. So, I mean, it would be excellent if we can have you on for another episode.
I'd love to. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. And thank you guys for watching. Thanks so much to Harrison for producing this podcast. All the links for the Upcycled Beauty Company, the whole portfolio that Harry mentioned will be down in the description box below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And we'll see you in the next one.